This is my first attempt at creating art for me, not a company, not a private commission, just me. Now I have done these types of paintings before, but that was a long time ago. And I've always had this dream of creating my own world, but I've largely kept this dream locked away, and I have not acted on it in any way. I've decided that now is the time, and I have to start somewhere. This painting is that somewhere. So here's the entire process from start to finish, full of monstrous failures and multiple dead ends. I'm calling this painting the White Elephant. So the idea here is that these two kids discovered this giant dead squid, this giant monster that has washed up on the beach right before a storm comes and washes it away. So they're the only two people that have seen this, and they don't know what it means yet. So they have this memory that they share, but they don't know what it means. What you see me flipping through here are just early sketches of me trying to figure out what the overall composition is going to be. But I really wasn't sure at the beginning whether I wanted a completely alien monster or a realistic giant squid or some kind of combination between the two, and I sort of just pressed forward without really thinking it through. And that's why you see the eye shape change throughout the painting, because I really just couldn't decide what I wanted out of the monster. Now at this stage, I've already taken the thumbnail that I did at the beginning and gridded it up onto the final board. And that's what I'm drawing here. And you can see me struggle with it. I draw this whole tentacle and then I erase it and redraw it. And it's all the same thing. I couldn't really decide what I wanted. Did I want this decaying, rotting, fleshy monster thing, or did I want it to be as if it had just died and washed up? So I kind of leaned more towards the less grotesque option. Now this is the final drawing of the kids. And this is two photo references of myself dressed up, photoshopped together to help me get a better idea of how to draw them. Now in order to get the bike tires right, I had to spend some extra time trying to figure out a process that would make sense to my brain, because it gave me a big headache, and I did not want to have to redraw these 100 times in the final painting. So I spent some time at the beginning trying to nail down a process that would be easy enough to replicate in the final drawing. Now you can see me holding a model in my left hand. I sculpted that to help me get the forms right. You can kind of see how that works here. Without it, I simply could not imagine how those tentacles interweave and work. I would not be able to picture that. A better artist maybe, but not me. Now this is the finished final drawing, and this, to me, is when things get fun. So in order to figure out the colors you want in the final painting, it helps to do some color sketches first. So I print out the final drawing on a piece of printer paper, grab some acrylic matte medium, put the matte medium on watercolor paper, smear that around, and then put the printed piece of paper on top of that. Put a little bit more matte medium on top of that, let that dry, and now it's totally sealed and you can paint on top of it. And that's what I did here for this black and white sketch. Now this is kind of my roadmap for the rest of the work, for all these little sketches and for the final. Now I wanted the end painting to sort of feel like it was painted in the 1920s. So I wanted a real limited palette, real earthy tones. So I'm only using a couple tubes of paint for this. But I couldn't quite wrap my head around how it would work. So with each of these, I'm trying to see if the colors click. And they just weren't clicking. They weren't making sense to me. I tried a couple different things in each one. In this one, I made the water a bit greener. And in this next one, I introduced a little red. But none of them really felt right to me. It just didn't work. So I did another one. And then I actually did a few more after this one. But here's them all together, and I'll let you see if you can spot the one that I used in the final. Now the process of the final painting is kind of the same as the color sketches. I used the acrylic matte medium to seal the pencil drawing. But then I did this brown underpainting, and I'm not totally sure why I did that. I think I just couldn't quite find a good way to start. I don't know if I would do that again, but it at least got some paint onto the board and got me started. So after that's dry, you come in with your color and you paint on top of that. And if you look, you can see that the paint's sort of semi-transparent, so that brown underpainting shows through. And it's useful in some areas. But this is where most other artists would tell you how calculated and smart they are about how they're painting, but I honestly had no idea what I was doing. I was kind of jumping all over the place, painting the background, then painting the boys, then erasing out what I painted on top of them, and then doing details of a hat as if that made sense before I had painted the rest of the scene. I really did not know what I was doing, so I was kind of just bouncing all over the place. I'm using chalk here to kind of reinforce some of the stuff that I lost. And I find it actually works pretty well because when you paint over the chalk just kind of dissolves into the wet paint. But despite my fancy chalk technique, this is the part of the painting where I really started to run into major problems. So I'm at a point now where I've become very frustrated with the whole thing. There's a couple things that I did not see as an issue at the beginning, but I've run into now. The way the water comes up against the squid, I may redo that, and that might help out a bit. Is this transition from the light areas to the shadow areas, both in the sand and then into the water. This, I'm trying not to judge too harshly because I know that when I put some of the surface texture of the sand on there, it might read a little better. Whereas right now it looks very soft and kind of confused and not very sand-like. I'm kind of stuck in this phase of not really being quite sure how to continue. Now, if you look at the painting at this point, it is complete trash. I mean, it's bad. There is no Bob Ross happy trees painting here. It is torture. I hate it. And I really wanted to quit at this point. I was very close to just burning it and being done with it. But I decided to go back to the model. I decided to rephotograph some things. I submerged the model in water and tried to figure out how the water would cut off the squid. And so I repainted the water level against the squid, and that seemed to give it a little bit more believability. I still had a lot in the painting that looked awful, but it started to feel just a little bit better. So I was kind of doing major surgery here and there. I was reinforcing the shadows, and if you look how the model is superimposed over this painting, you can see how closely I followed the shadows, and that seemed to help make things look a little bit better. I even put little suckers on the little model so I could get the shadows right, because that was confusing me too. So that model really came in handy. And all these techniques that I'm using, building the model, doing the drawing, sealing it with acrylic matte medium, all of this comes straight from James Gurney and his two books, Imaginative Realism and Color and Light. Could not recommend them more. I'm a huge James Gurney fan. That should be very clear to anyone that has seen any of my stuff before. But at this point, putting in a couple of the surface details on the water and the sand, it finally starts to feel like a painting and less like a globby mess of nothing. So I'm finally at a point where I'm pretty happy with the whole thing. The water is looking okay. It's not finished yet, but I think it's in the realm of what I wanted it to be. The sand is finally looking a bit more convincing. The kids look pretty good to me. The squid is not finished yet, but it's getting there. The only section that I'm very unhappy with is the entire sky. I think it sucks. So I'm going to scrape down as much paint as I possibly can. I don't like this color scheme. I don't like the cloud shapes that I used. I don't like really anything about it. So I'm just going to redo the whole thing. All in all, this painting took about 8 months to complete, which is way too long. But it's even worse than that. I spent 7 years before deciding to invest time in my own paintings. But I want to make this a consistent process, one that enables me to put out paintings on a regular basis. But that means I can't shy away from failure. So I offer up this painting not as a trophy of success, but as a display of transparency and an acceptance that realizing a dream is not an easy thing to do.